I want to give you guys, there's at least 3 different ways we can look at this book, okay? There's many perspectives among us in this room, and there are many perspectives among scholars. So there isn't just one way to look at this book, and like I said, it's okay to not have all the answers, to not know that Song of Solomon for sure means this, okay? So when we ask ourselves, what is love poetry doing in the Bible? I put up 3 things I'm going to talk about today. The first one is like our traditional interpretation. Okay, we've probably all heard this one. In Jewish tradition, it's an allegory about Israel, represented by the man, being loved by God, represented by the woman. Or the other way around. Israel, represented by the woman, being loved by God, represented by the man. Okay? Christian tradition says the same thing, except the man is Jesus, and he's pursuing his bride, the church. Okay? And that's really beautiful in what it is, so we'll talk about that. I'm not going to get into it yet. Second, we're going to talk about this book as a metaphor for Lady Wisdom's pursuit of humanity. Okay? And in this one, the roles are switched. The female character becomes the portrayal of the divine. And then the third way we can look at this is it's erotic love poetry. It is what it displays itself to be. Modern archaeological discoveries in ancient Egypt and Babylon have actually shown that this style of love poetry is really common. Okay? It was all over the place, so it really would have influenced ancient Israel. So we can see it. Scholars believe that Song of Songs is kind of what it presents itself to be. It's a reflection on the divine gift of love. Okay? All right. So first, we're going to look at the traditional interpretation. Okay? Jesus loves us. We know that. Okay? Song of Songs becomes an allegory, a metaphor. The man is God. He pursues his bride, the church. Okay? And a Jewish reader, when they read this, would have the Exodus story in mind. Okay? They'd know their Torah. They would know those books. So they'd have the Exodus story in mind, and they'd be thinking about when God brought them out of Egypt to Mount Sinai and gave them the 10 Commandments. Okay? Some of the things that God said when he brought them out of Egypt were, I will take you out. I will rescue you. I will redeem you. I will take you to me, and you will be my treasured possession. Okay? That's wedding language. Those are things that a Jewish groom would have said to his Jewish bride throughout their engagement and marriage process. So the Israelites are already thinking, oh, okay, we're getting married at Mount Sinai. That's what's happening with these 10 Commandments. Okay? And that connects to Song of Songs because Song of Songs starts out with wedding language. The woman says, oh, that the king would bring me to his chambers. Bringing your woman to your chambers during a wedding ceremony was like the culmination of the wedding ceremony. So we can already make that connection here if we're a Jewish mind. Additionally, when the 10 Commandments were given, they weren't just a list of do's and don'ts for the Jewish people, okay? Back then, they would have had an agreement that they called a ketubah. Okay, for any Hebrew scholars, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but a ketubah. And what that is, it's this agreement, this list of commitments that both the bride and the groom are agreeing to. And they're saying, this is what it's going to take for our marriage to work. Okay, this is what it's going to take for us to move into this covenant, into this commitment. And they read it and agree upon it. It's like our vows, but like take it up a notch. Okay, so that they know what they're entering into. And they would have seen this, they would have seen the 10 Commandments as their ketubah. God telling them, okay, guys, this is how we're going to live together. And they agreed to that. Okay, so Song of Songs would remind them of this marriage commitment. Second, I'm going to look at the Christian context and that interpretation, okay? Very, very similar. We see it as Jesus is pursuing his bride, the church, okay? And I'm like a super logical, clear to the point. If somebody got up here who's super poetic, they would make this really lovey, and I wish I could. So go home and read the Bible yourself, get all feelsy about it. I'm really not good at the feelsy part. But I'm going to tell you that there's so many feels about how much God loves us, right? And you see that in Song of Songs. And a Christian reader, we're gonna go in our minds immediately. We'll go to Ephesians 5. Okay, Ephesians 5 says, oh, the mystery of marriage, the mystery of God is that they're one and the same, right? A man should love his wife the way Christ loves the church. So we see this marital relationship happening in Song of Songs, and we're like, gosh, that's how our husband loves us. That's how our God loves us, okay? We see it as putting that divine love on display, okay? We can also, if we like to read the book of Revelation, jump to Revelation 19 and think about the the final wedding feast that we're all invited to at the end, right? Where we all sit down and Jesus comes and marries his bride, the church, and it's beautiful. It says, I'm going to read it to you, Revelation 19. It says, "Let us be glad. Let us rejoice and give him glory, because the marriage of the Lamb has come, and his bride has prepared herself." So when we read this book, we can think about that final wedding day, and we can think about, wow, like I get to prepare myself for that, for this day where he's going to come and marry his bride. We can also look at Revelation 3. So there's a part in Song of Songs where the man comes and he knocks on the woman's door. Okay, it says he knocked and he knocked. And in Revelation 3, Jesus is writing a letter to one of the churches, the church of Laodicea, and he says, "See, I stand at the door and I knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come into him and eat with him and he with me." So that's showing us this picture of, wow, like God's going to be knocking on my door. If I just answer, like he's going to come in and share a meal. And sharing a meal in that culture was intimate. It was something you did with people you were in good relationship with, right? It showed that you were in relationship. So he's going to do that for us if we just open the door. Okay? We can see through this poem that our sexual drive that's within us, that is displayed in Song of Songs, is actually like a pointer to God's passionate pursuit of humanity. Okay, so when we feel that, we can understand just how intensely God is pursuing us. Right? And I hope y'all know, married people, what that is to feel that, right? And then now we can connect that to Christ. Additionally, we know as humans that love is risky, right? We know that it can lead to heartbreak. We know that it often does lead to heartbreak. But the thing about it is, God knows that too. He knows how risky it is, because when he created this world, he created a people that he loved very much, and then he gave us the choice to choose whether or not to return that love. And more often than not, they chose not to return it. And yet he continued to love them. He never overrides our freedom to choose that. He just continues to pursue us. Okay? He respects our power to decide, and he lets us make the next move. Yeah. So that's the kind of love that God has for us, and it's displayed in the constant pursuit that we see in Song of Songs. Okay? So go home and read that and get real mushy about it. Okay? All right. The second way we can look at this story, when we use the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, to interpret itself, we see really similar language throughout all the different books. Okay? And we see really similar language used in songs, in Solomon's story, where they talk about him as a king, in Proverbs, and in the Garden of Eden story. There's really similar language used throughout. So when it says at the beginning, the Song of Songs, which is of Solomon, remember, we're already connecting this to his wisdom literature. We're automatically connecting this to Solomon. Later, when we read the book, we see that 70% of it is spoken by the woman. 70% is spoken by the female character. Okay? And they call her Shulamite. Shulamite is her name, her title, I don't know, but they call her Shulamite. Shulamite is the female version of Shlomo, okay? Shlomo means Solomon in Hebrew. So basically, Shulamite is like calling her Solomina. So by that very fact, we're connecting her now to Solomon, which means we're connecting her to wisdom, okay? When we think of wisdom, we think of Proverbs, right? I hope. This is where my brain goes. I'm just putting it on y'all. So when we think about the pursuit of Lady Wisdom in the first chapters of Proverbs, we see imagery drawn from images of love, right? It's this king telling his son, go out, pursue Lady Wisdom. She's going to pursue you too. Don't commit adultery with Lady Folly. Just love wisdom. We see that over and over again. And so since knowing Song of Songs is also about love and pursuing, we can connect them even further, okay? So I'm going to do that for y'all on the screen, right? So I've got verses from Songs paired up with verses from Proverbs, and we're going to look at the similarities in language, okay? Things that, like these, what Tim Mackey calls hyperlinks that we should be connecting to, okay? So in Songs chapter 3, the woman says, I will arise now and go about the city. Through the streets and the plazas, I will seek the one I love. Proverbs 1, wisdom calls out in the streets. She makes her voice heard in the public squares. So in both cases, we see the character going out into the streets, seeking the one that they love. Okay? In Songs 4, the woman says, let my love come to his garden and eat its choicest fruits. Proverbs, wisdom says, my fruit is better than solid gold, my harvest than pure silver. So they're both talking about the value that their fruit holds for somebody. Okay? Song 7 says, I will climb this is the man saying, I will climb the palm tree and take hold of its fruit, talking about the lady. Okay? Proverbs 3 says about wisdom, she's a tree of life to those who will take hold of her. So in both books, we're seeing this image of embracing, of taking hold of this tree of life, which tree of life, Genesis, we can also connect to wisdom. Okay? So we see all of these connections. In Proverbs, the difference is, like I said, it's a mutual seeking, right? The man is seeking wisdom, wisdom is seeking him. Okay, it's mutual. In songs, it's always the woman doing the seeking. She is the one going out into the streets. She is the one pursuing her beloved. She calls him her beloved. Okay? She leaves her house. She goes into the square. She looks for this elusive man. And then when he comes to her, I talked about it in the last one, he knocks on the door. Okay? But he knocks on the door at a really inappropriate time. He comes in the middle of the night and knocks on her door. She's already in bed. She's got her pajamas on. She's taken off all the things that needs to wear in public. She's taken a bath. She's in bed. And so even now, like if a man comes to a woman's house in the middle of the night, that's not appropriate. You don't answer the door for that, right? So especially in this culture, even if they were married, even if this couple was married, the man would have gone to a male relative's house if it was that late at night. And he would have stayed there until his wife was ready in the morning. Okay, just to respect her as a wife, I suppose. So he comes at a really bad time, and she thinks like, okay, I've already changed my clothes. I've already taken a bath. Do I really need to like put clothes on, go all the way out to the gate, get myself all dirty again, open it up for him? And she decides, yeah, I love him that much. I'll go get him. And he's gone. He's not even there anymore. So she leaves the house and she goes out into the streets to look for him. Okay? And that makes me think so much about what we do. How often have we asked for wisdom at a really inappropriate time, right? Maybe like weeks have gone by since we've talked to God, months, years, and then we're faced with like this really tough decision, right? Oh God, I don't know if I should take this job. I don't know if I should date that girl. I don't know if, and all of a sudden we need wisdom and we need it now. And James tells us, yeah, ask for wisdom. If you ask for wisdom, he'll give it to you. So we ask, and God has every right to be like, yo, where have you been? Where have you been all these months? And all of a sudden now you think you need me? But he doesn't. Yeah. He opens up the door and he's like, come on in, right? But then, where are we? We're gone. We're gone. We found somebody else's wisdom to follow a lot of the time, right? Or we hear God's wisdom and we decide, no, I don't like that. I could do this a better way, right? And yet, he doesn't leave it. He doesn't stay in the house and just close the door and be like, okay. He goes out into the streets and he pursues us with his wisdom, trying to tell us over and over again, like, stop, listen. Okay? He chases us just like the woman chases her beloved in this story. Okay? So songs, it makes us ask this question, what if Solomon had gotten it right? Solomon, in all of his wisdom he was given, chose instead to build his own kingdom, to build his own Garden of Eden, to build his own empire. What if he had gotten it right? The woman in songs, she pursues the husband. She pursues her beloved. It's not about him seeking her or doing anything by his effort, right? What if Solomon had just let that happen, had just let wisdom pursue him? Would we have a different story than we do already? I don't know. Okay. I've got one more slide trying to convince y'all that this is actually about Lady Wisdom, not about God as the man again. But that we've got one more connection to make, because for the woman to be the divine portrayal of wisdom also fits with the portrayal of Eve in the garden, okay? And now I know y'all are like, Shannon, Eve was the downfall of all humanity. What do you mean she matches Lady Wisdom? I'm in a soapbox. We have to stop starting in Genesis chapter 3. We cannot start reading in Genesis 3 because when God created Eve, he created her to be Ezer. Ezer Kenegdo is what he called her, okay? And Ezer, our English Bibles do us a great disservice when they translate that helper or helpmeet. Because what Ezer means is it's an indispensable deliverance without which you can't do what you're supposed to do. She is an indispensable deliverance without which you cannot do what you're supposed to do. And we know this because the other person who's called Ezer in the Bible is God. Okay? And often we think about helper as like, oh, she's my support, she's my helper, my whatever. I've heard all kinds of things that just make it less than. But we shouldn't think about God in that way. Right? We do. But like David calls God his Ezer throughout the Psalms because he is an indispensable deliverance over and over again for David. So we need to remember that God, in the beginning, created Eve to be that same way. Okay? He gave her this embodiment of wisdom so that Adam could do the things that he needed to do, which is why the fall is so tragic, because she was made to be wisdom, and yet she chose to be wise in her own eyes. She chose to go the other direction and not listen to God's wisdom. Okay? So how did I connect this woman in songs to Eve? In the story, the couple they're in the garden. No, lies. They're in the house. The couple's in the house in chapter 5. Then they move into the garden in chapter 6. And by the end, they end the story under a tree. Oh, under a tree in the garden. That should automatically, anytime y'all see trees, gardens in a story, go back to Genesis and find out how it connects. Because it does. It always connects to the Garden of Eden. Okay? So it asks us this question. Not only what happened if Solomon didn't blow it, but what happens if Adam and Eve never blew it? What happens if they got it right? Okay? And we see at the very conclusion, the part I read at the beginning, it says, love is as strong as death. So what we see here is that in Genesis 3, when Adam and Eve chose to get wisdom in the way that they thought was good, they stopped loving each other. And that loss of love brought death. Yeah. Here it tells us love is just that strong. So the reunification of love can actually defeat death. And that's good news. Because that means that any choice that happened in Genesis 3, we can change if we act like Song of Songs. Right. If we love in this way that this couple loves, we can reverse that death. So good. Okay? Beautiful. Okay. Let's talk about sex, baby. This is the part that makes me really nervous. So our third interpretation, we can't ignore that this is, at its baseline, just very erotic sex poetry, right? It's love poetry. And there is a place and a time to discuss and to appreciate the beauty of sex in its proper context, right? I'm going to hold my notes because I don't want to mess this up. Healthy erotic sexuality within the context of marriage is beautiful, and that should be celebrated, right? That is a gift, and we get to see it happening in the Bible, okay? This poem shows two people who are charged with desire for one another, and we have to ask ourselves, like, well, what is it that meets that desire? What is it that meets that for them? We never read in this book that they actually have sex. They are always separated when it gets steamy, right? So something is telling us that they're in love, and something is meeting that desire for them, but what is it, right? What we see in this story is the intimacy and the closeness that we as human beings need, okay? That again, should activate that garden narrative in our mind. We should again think about Adam and Eve, naked and unashamed, right? The image of man and woman in the garden, they were naked and vulnerable, and yet they were also unified and safe, okay? And that resonates throughout the story of Song of Songs, and it reminds us when God says, hey, this is actually what it's supposed to be, okay? Because this poem is in the Bible, we get to see that this kind of love is a divine gift. It is from God, and it's meant to permeate and to transform the world, okay? It's meant to overturn what happened in Genesis 3. Love is greater than death. So this also addresses the question, what if Adam and Eve had gotten it right? We get to witness the love of a couple in this story that is untainted by selfishness, untainted by sin. It's just pure and beautiful and holy. And like, what if we got to celebrate that desire within us? Right? with that desire that we have for another human should be celebrated in this way. And okay, so I don't think that we talk about sexuality enough as a capital C American church. Okay, so Song of Songs is read once a year in a Jewish synagogue, right? Usually the time of Passover. It's read once a year. This is the first sermon I've ever heard preached on Song of Songs in a church. Okay, so you're welcome. Clearly, I have all the knowledge here. So I didn't even read from it much today because I didn't want to make everybody blush, right? And I didn't want to blush. I didn't wear enough makeup for that. But if this really is the greatest song, like, shouldn't we be singing it more? Yeah. Right? If this is a song of all songs. So when we do talk about sex in the church, we talk about the morality of it. Yeah. We talk about what we can and can't do. Right. Okay? It's a topic that's largely been considered off limits because, pastors, people have lost their jobs over this topic. It's charged politically. It's charged morally. But the less we talk about it, the worse it gets, okay? We, as followers of Christ, we need to be able to discuss healthy sexuality more, okay? Human beings, we're sexual beings. It's part of who we are, okay? Hiding from the conversation doesn't breed functional sexuality. Neither does talking about what we believe to be dysfunctional sexuality. We're really good at fighting against what we say is not good sex, but how much are we talking about what is? Okay. Healthy sexuality is meant to be celebrated in the same way as healthy eating, healthy spirituality, healthy psychology. It's a part of how God designed us and how God created us. Okay. So when we're discipling, we need to be able to disciple the whole human. Okay. In Song of Songs, she says, "My own vineyard is mine to give." Okay. Sex isn't about the search for something that's been lost or something missing. It's the expression of something that's already been found, that she already has. Okay, it's hers to give. It's not something that should be taken. We talk about he took my virginity or he's taking her whatever. We talk about that, but it's not something to be taken. It's something to be given. Okay, and one of the problems that we have to deal with is for centuries in ancient culture, like all of the centuries of ancient culture, we have recognized the biology of the human being, okay? We go through puberty, we get married, okay? Now, people are waiting, now that we've evolved, we've got more education, we've progressed, we wait longer and longer and longer. Now the average age of marriage is in the early 30s, okay? So, now I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, right? I got married at 31. I think everybody should get married in their 30s. We should not be marrying off our 12-year-olds, okay? Hear that, please. But what I am saying is that's created a problem, okay? The church has failed to address this problem that's been created as a result. There's this tension now. There's 20 more years of adolescence than there ever has been before, okay? From 12 to 32 is 20 years of time that our biology is telling us something different than our spirituality is telling us. And remember, they're both a part of how we were created. So we have this war inside of us between our spirituality and our sexuality. Right. And we need to figure out how to navigate that for 20 years. Yeah. Okay? And the thing about it is, the church doesn't acknowledge that tension. It doesn't say, it's hard. Yeah. That is really a tense, difficult place to be. Okay? God designed our bodies to work in a certain way, and in a way, we're operating outside of that. Okay? And not that it can't be done, but because of that, now there's a lot of people carry this shame, failure, insecurity, because the problem was never addressed, and the motto became just don't do it. Okay? That doesn't leave a lot of room for mistakes. Just don't do it doesn't leave a lot of room for questions. Before I did this today, I reached out to a handful of people just to make sure I wasn't totally off base, right? I don't want to be preaching a message to everybody who's like, no, we talk about sex in church all the time. So I asked some people about it, and what I found was several people never felt like they could ask questions about sex in church. And I was like, well, where did you ask your questions? They went to their friends, they went to pornography, but they didn't go to church. okay? That's a problem for me. I'm going to go off script. And I'm going to talk about Shannon. I'm going to be vulnerable, so this isn't in the Bible. If you don't want to listen, close your ears, walk out. It won't offend me, okay? But I'm going to talk about my experience here. I grew up in the 90s, early 2000s, right at the height of that, like, purity movement, right? Which was an attempt for the church to start talking about sex. It was a beautiful thing with a really good heart where the church says, like, we need to start this conversation, okay? What it did for me, for some that I know, was opened up room for shame, for failure, for insecurity, okay? I was told my whole life at many a women's conference, because women and men, we've always done this separately, so welcome to a mixed talk. We've always done this separately, and the women hear much different things than the men hear, okay? So I was told my body was shameful, it was a stumbling block, and it needed to be covered up, because if I didn't cover my body, I would cause my brother in Christ to sin, and sin leads to death. And I'm an Enneagram 1, so the last thing I want to do is cause anybody to fail. Right? So I hold on to this shame of, oh my gosh, like if I step out of line, I'm causing him to make a mistake, and then I'm going to ruin his relationship with God. It's not just about me. I also have to protect him, and I have to cover my body. But then, the instant you get married, all of this that was no, no, no is now, yeah, go for it. Do all of it. And I'm like, what? Like, what? You want him to do what? So I have to navigate this insecurity of I don't even know what to do with it myself. And the guy who married us, actually, he's a pastor, he's fantastic, a wonderful human being, talked about how men and women in marriage have needs. Part of our job before we got married was to find out what each of our needs are, right? But he told me, he said, Shannon, one of a man's basic needs is sex. You can't take it away from him. Like, that can't be something that you can say he doesn't get, because that is a basic need of his. So if you want him to be happy in your marriage, he needs to have sex. And I was like, whew, there's no pressure there, right? No pressure. Not only do I not know what to do with my body, now if I can't make him happy, he's going to leave me and he's going to go somewhere else because I'm not meeting his basic needs. Yeah. What? Like, okay, cool. So it opened this whole realm of insecurity. On the flip side, for those who maybe didn't have to experience that insecurity of how to have sex after they were married because they did it beforehand, in those same women's conferences, we're told about how our virtue and our purity is found not in our hearts. My purity is not found in my heart or my mind, it's found in my body. Yeah. And if I give away my purity before marriage, then I'm letting down my husband. And a godly man is looking for a woman who's pure. Okay? And we did exercises like took tape and stuck it on each other. And if you stick it on too many people, it loses its stickiness. Yeah. That's you if you have sex with people before you're married. We did exercises like, here's a piece of paper. This is you as a virgin. Crumple it up. Uncrumple it. Now, can you get the wrinkles out? Right? So, like, now all of a sudden you've got all these women living with this shame of, oh, I can't get my wrinkles out. And meanwhile, Jesus is over here like, girl, you are $100 bill. You're a $100 bill. I don't care if you're wrinkly or flat. Like, whatever you are still $100. Okay? But that's not the message the church gave millions of women in the 90s and the 2000s, at least from my experience. Okay? So, all that to be said, like, we tend to put our sexuality in two different categories, right? We're either animals, right? We're driven by every sexual urge we ever have, or we're angels. We're pure and we're untouched. Okay, but the problem with that is we were created to be humans. Okay, we either deny the spiritual dimension of our sexuality and we become animals, or we deny the physical element of our sexuality and we become angels. Okay, but because at the beginning of the universe, when God spoke the universe into existence, he spoke it into a world that was tohu vavohu. Okay, tohu vavohu means wild and waste, formless and void. It was chaos. And God brought to it order and life and beauty. Okay, and he then tasked humans with the ability to continue that creation, right? To keep moving it away from chaos into beauty. He said, be fruitful and multiply. Okay, but when we choose when we decide we can only live like either animals or angels, we're going backwards. Yeah. We're going the wrong direction towards chaos because animals and angels were created before humans. We were meant to move forward, not backwards. So we have to ask ourselves, like, we know that how we live matters because God created us to be humans, but what does that mean? What kind of world are we creating? Okay? What does it mean to deal with our sexuality as a human? And so the Father who loves us gave us the Song of Songs in this book to talk about it, to start that conversation. Okay? How does this book teach us what we're to do with our sexuality as a human? Okay? So often we haven't left a ton of room for honesty in these conversations with each other as adults, with our kids, right? Like I said, people I knew didn't go to church for questions. They didn't go to church for conversations about sex, okay? We haven't had a super compelling reason why following Jesus is a better way, why waiting for sexual intimacy to be joined to marital intimacy is the best way to do it. We haven't had a compelling reason for that, okay? We don't teach what it means to be a kingdom of priests. We give the do's and don'ts. We give the moral code, and that's not enough for a hormonal 16-year-old, okay? You tell them not to do anything, they're going to do the opposite. I mean, I'm 32, I'm still going to do the opposite, okay? Remember the 10 Commandments, right? They weren't just a list of do's and don'ts. They were a ketubah. They were a promise to one another. They were this list of commitments of what it would take, okay? And these wedding vows had a meaning and a purpose and a call to be a kingdom of priests, okay? Same thing with those laws in Leviticus. They weren't just rules. They were meant to show people how to live in a way that blessed the nations, okay? It was beyond just their own individual, but how does the way I live bless the nations, okay? They put God on display, da-da-da-da-da. Okay, when the people forgot that, when they forgot that it wasn't just a list of do's and don'ts, it wasn't just a moral code, that is when their nation fell apart. Okay? That's when they ended up in exile. So we as a church need to find a way to reclaim sexuality in a way that is healthy and purposeful, right? Not just telling people what we're against, but telling them how to live in the beauty of divine love and of being these sexual beings who are divinely loved by a Father who created us that way. Okay? We need to reflect an understanding of our current world and how healthy sexuality can fit within that, within those 20 years of tension that we now live in. Okay? So, to conclude, the hope and the beauty in all of this is, though, that God can restore anything. A really good friend told me this yesterday. It reminded me. He can restore anything. Any relationship that we have, whether it's a marriage relationship, a dating relationship, a friendship, a relationship with God himself or with the church, God can come in and restore that. He tells us that love is as strong as death. Okay? This book shows us the pursuit that he's been on to bring us back into that divine love. Okay? That pure, unselfish love, and he offers that to us without restraint. And we get to decide how we're going to live it out. Okay? And I tried not to provide any answers so that you have to go home and think about it. Okay? This is my works cited. I don't think of any of this on my own. I talk to everybody and I read everything. So if anybody wants to do more research, these are some really great sources that I used. What? Yeah, Dan sent me a picture of this book and I have no idea what it is. So ask him. It was really great. It was a really great excerpt in there. Okay. Papa, thank you for this morning. I pray that it sticks if it needs to stick and it doesn't stick if it doesn't need to stick. But either way, that your Holy Spirit would move and make people start asking questions and coming to you to find possibilities. Amen.